Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our special Education World Facebook Live. It's going to be a discussion on the Union Budget 22-23 and education hits and misses. Let me begin by introducing our wonderful panelists. Dr. Swati Popat Vats. Dr. Swati is the founder president of the Early Childhood Association of India. She's a pioneer crusader for universal formal early childhood care and education. She's also the president of the Podar Jumbo Kids chain of over 450 owned and franchised preschools across the country. Swati, welcome. Always a pleasure to have you on my panel.
Thank you for thinking of the little ones also.
Always, as you know, Education World is, has been always the first supporter of early childhood education. Always, you have our support. Let me introduce now Atul Khosla. Atul is a IIT Kanpur graduate. He has vast experience in very high-end consulting firms, including McKinsey & Company in New York. Atul is now the founder and vice chancellor of Shoolini University, Himachal Pradesh. Incidentally, it's also ranked #1 in Himachal Pradesh in the Education World India Private University rankings. Welcome, Atul.
Thank you, Summiya, and it's an honor to be here. By the way, in the latest QS rankings, we are #1 in research in the country.
So excellent.
Talk about research as we get into the discussion.
Great, great. And our next panelist is Praveen Raju. Praveen is the co-chair of FICCI Arise. FICCI Arise is a representative private schools lobby group under the FICCI umbrella. And Praveen is also the founder of Suchitra Academy, Hyderabad, well known for its badminton training academy, where our badminton superstar PV Sindhu trains. Praveen, welcome. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Summiya.
And next panelist is Divya. Divya Lal is one of India's most well-known edtech industry leaders. She has experience working in some very blue-chip IT edtech companies, including NIT, Educom, eBix, Smart Class. Divya is now the founder and CEO of Fliplearn Education, which is an award-winning online subscription-based homework transformation platform. Divya, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And our next panelist is Rohan Joshi. Rohan is a senior fellow at the Bolo Project and Centre for Civil Society, which is India's leading think tank. And Rohan was also previously the associate director of research at Centre for Civil Society, and his areas of expertise are education and skill development. Rohan, warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Summiya. Thank you. Great pleasure.
Great. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the national media and everyone discuss the union budget, they all are narrowly focused on discussing on, industry, and they have actually left out discussing education. So, Education World hopes to rectify that, which I believe a monumental error. So, in this panel discussion, we're going to discuss what is there for education and what is not there, most importantly, for Indian education in the Union Budget 2022-23. As we all, I don't know if you all have seen the latest news bites, the allocation has been increased for the education sector from 93,000 to 24 crore last year, 204,278 crore this year, which is an increase of about 11.8%, which hardly, covers, according to me, barely inflation. As we all know, education sector worst hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. India's 1.5 million schools, 1.34 million Anganwadis, over 1,000 universities, over 40,000 colleges, most of sporadically with sporadic reopenings, most of them have been closed for over 82 weeks. That's the world's longest education lockdown. We've overtaken, by the way, Uganda last week. So now we have the dubious distinction of having the world's longest education lockdown of any country worldwide. So we're facing an education emergency in the country. Majority of children have had no education, given the abysmal access of internet, penetration in the country and digital access for over 2 years. But unfortunately, looks like the union budget has again ignored education. So ladies and gentlemen, now I'm going to ask my panelists to I'm going to have a quick rapid fire round. I'm going to ask each one of you all to give your 3 hits and misses of the union budget for education. Swati, I want to begin with you.
So I was actually going to bring one begging bowl, to visually show what is happening to our sector, that our begging bowl always remains empty. I think the fundamental problem is that somebody else makes the NEP and somebody else makes the budget. I don't think it's the same people who get involved, because the NEP talks about 6% GDP to be spent. So I have my begging bowl here, it's empty. And it's very important to understand that Anganwadis last year got a 16% increase. And this year they've been given a 3% increase. Now, they were given a 16% increase last year for those same two schemes that were spoken about today. But I don't see any work having been done because the Anganwadis were closed for the last 2 years. This year, we have an increase of 3%. But, India is struggling with health and nutrition issues in children. So education is not something that the Anganwadis spend on. In fact, education is not even part of the duties given for an Anganwadi Sevika. So it is very important to understand that the NEP has now clubbed us as foundational years. And there are 4 ministries who have been put in charge of the foundational years. I think these 4 ministries should be contributing to the early childhood education budget. And that is how it should be made, because otherwise early childhood, which are the foundational years, the NEP states 85% of the cumulative brain development is happening, which means you are losing your human resource because you are not able to understand that education in the early years requires a budget. And if you look at the Anganwadi budgets, very little, in fact, nil is kept aside for education purposes. If a bulk of it naturally goes in the midday meals, etc. As I said, health and nutrition take away a chunk of the entire budget, and then the other schemes, of course, take a lot of it. So where early childhood,
I'm not happy with the budget. We'll come back and discuss. So this is going to be like a quick round. Just your initial comments, what you liked and didn't like for education in the budget, and I'm going to come back and we discuss in detail that what.
Sure. So for early years, this is it.
Atul, I want to come to you now, Atul, and ask you what did you think there was anything at all for higher education and research in the budget? Did it hit any targets, or did you also disappointed?
Let me step back for a second, Summiya, and I'll throw some numbers over here. The NEP expects the gross enrollment ratio to increase from 26 to 50% over the years. And I did some numbers, and the numbers suggest that if this has to happen, around $1 trillion of investments will be needed in higher ed. $1 trillion, that's $1,000 billion. $1 billion is 7,500 crores. So you can do the numbers and do the zeros. So the task is huge. And it cannot happen by pure government. It needs sizable private investment to come in, and this is proven across the world. When I look at the budget, I fear that a lot of initiatives are coming through, and I fear that there would be increasing control of the industry into bureaucracy and the public sector. Where is the freedom and where is deregulation of the industry coming in? So that's the first point I'd like to make. So I think that's a big miss. How are you promoting private capital into higher education? Of course, I would have loved for-profit in higher education, but that's a very controversial debate. I think the second miss is around research and innovation. The heart of any country is research and innovation. Where are we getting more research and innovation into the university sector? I think that's again a miss. Yes, there was a thought about 50,000 crores coming into an R&D fund. I was expecting some talk about that. That's not happened. And finally, it's about some very tactical stuff, GST issues, patenting the reliefs for students, startup money coming into universities, etc. So I think those are the misses. Let's come to what's really good. I think really good stuff. I mean, first of all, great presentation. I was looking at a presentation by the ministry. Clearly, they've got the presentations right. They're talking about a digital university. So I don't know what the intent of that is. Is that the intent of disintermediating private education? So Byju's should be careful about that. But digital university, great idea. Getting bilingual and other languages into e-content. I think that's great. Building world-class universities with deregulated effect on financial services and technology. They're saying, if you're a world-class university, you can offer courses in FS and technology without Indian regulation. But I don't know what a world-class university is, how they define it. We are waiting for that. So good stuff at some level. I think the area where it's missing is belief in the private sector. I think I would have loved to see more of that. Over to you, Summiya.
Yeah, thanks, Atul. Very important point. We'll come back to that fundamental issue of why not liberalize Indian education, starting from K to PhD. Praveen, quickly over to you. Happy with the budget, especially for K-12 education. Any pluses, any minuses? What do you see as hits and misses there?
Thanks, Summiya. I'd like to echo what Rohan has just said about the 400 channels, one class, one channel in multiple languages. That's that's very good. And then the digital university is also very good. And one which is very close to my heart is the National Telemed Mental Health Center or program that the government plans to launch. The mental health situation with children and all of us, it's not very good out there. If you talk to any psychologist, they will tell you that the gravity of the problem is so large, and this is a very welcome initiative. And the budget, the numbers, as you said in your remarks, 6% of GDP remains a mirage. And it's time the government bells the cat and then allows private for-profit education. While it's controversial, in the larger interest of the country, we should take it head on. Possibly the gift city, where the world-class universities, as Rohan was mentioning, that they're going to come in with
Atul, it was Atul, Praveen. It was Atul who mentioned.
I'm so sorry.
No problem at all. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah. So the gift city, world-class institutions coming with no regulation. I'm just hoping that that is a start to liberalization and deregulation of schools and education sector at large. Let's hope that's the way forward. Yeah, I'm over to you, Summiya.
Okay, thanks. Divya, quickly over to you. What do you see for ed tech in that sphere? Do you think that any promising things have been announced, or you think there's been?
No, I think two big hits for me. One class, one TV channel being expanded, great, because you bring access. You're bringing vernacular content relevant to all tiers. That is definitely a hit. Second hit is 5G access being moved to last mile connectivities, etc. That's good. At least the initiative is there. What I feel is missing somewhere is there's no work towards affordable devices. What have we seen in the last 2 years is, even though there's been internet, but people don't have enough devices. I mean, you have TV channels. Where is the TV with them? Okay, where do they get the TV to really see all of this content and all? Or where are the devices? So I think definitely the idea was they can enroll out for a certain age group, let's say, K-12, wherever, special prices on special learning devices to be rolled out so that it's easier for parents to adopt. Otherwise, what we've seen is as soon as parents started moving, and I'm not looking at corporate offices, but laborers and, so many people who had to start earning a living could not give their small phone to the child at home to really get access to anything. So I think device is one. Second, I'll, come to what Atul said, GST. There's been a time that education service companies, etc., have had 0% service tax. We've gone through those eras when educational services were never taxed, right? And that is something I think we were definitely looking at, maybe a hit, bringing it down from 18 to 15%, or a bracket change from that point of view. So I think, yeah, that's been a miss from my part. And Third, I mean, in terms of, yeah, you're trying to build, but like Swati said, I mean, the NEP and the budget have no sync, basically. On one side, you have extremely progressive thought process of totally enabling. You want children in 11, 12 to choose any subjects and, really break the shackles. And we all know no school can afford 40 different teachers for 40 subjects. There's got to be a Zoom beaming of classes and sharing of resources, but then there's no thought to, how will schools really achieve or do that?
Yeah, good points raised, Divya. I'm going to come back to you on that. Rohan, over to you. If you could, briefly give what you thought was your hits and misses on your list.
Sure. Being last to go, the benefit is good. Points are already covered, so I can emphasize. I think the NEP, what's good really, that's what I believe in. To start with it, that the government has gone a bit cautious about increasing the allocation to budget. And contrary to the popular belief of 6% GDP allocation, it's actually good to go cautious about it. And I'll talk more about it later. Atul briefly touched upon that point. In K-12 as well as in higher education, there is huge amount of private investment that's coming in. And considering that, I think not chasing that 6% artificial number of 6% GDP allocation is actually not a bad move at all on the government's part. I'll talk more about it later. So that's definitely good in one sense. The other one is, of course, they have focused on the problem of here and now, which is obviously the pandemic, last 2 years, and a huge learning loss that we are talking about. What Praveen mentioned about the mental health impact of it, and overall what the teachers experience on a daily basis has been that children just have forgotten to learn. So it's appropriate that the focus is on to recover that learning loss, and whether it's through that one channel, one class, etc. I think that's the right thing to do to address the problem of here and now. Also, generally, the overall online learning, the blessing in disguise as such has been that people have started taking e-learning or tech-based learning more seriously. So I think giving focus to that in the budget is the right thing to do. A large chunk of school education budget has gone to Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan without any new methods of expenditure or talking about efficiency in expenditure, which I think is extremely important. All of us, including the poorest of poor, pay 2% education cess, which is dedicated towards elementary education. Year after year, the Prarambhik Shiksha Kosh, the non-lapsable fund that the government creates for elementary education, remains underutilized or unutilized to a certain extent, and to a great extent, actually. So it's about giving children's money back to them. It's collected from them, and it needs to be given back to them. So it could be in the form of making devices more accessible, which is currently the big need, and there is money for it. So it needs to be given back. So what is missing, really not so much of specific provisions, or in fact, there is no dearth of announcement of new schemes. It's about doing the things right and doing the things more efficiently and being accountable to the money that you're collecting from the taxpayers for education. That entire accountability framework is missing in the budget. And when you allocate the money, in the same breath, you need to talk about the efficiency of expenditure as well as the accountability of expenditure. And that entire part is missing in the budget. So that's something that I feel is a miss. Hit, as I said, I mean, it's at least trying to address the problem of here and now and recognizing the value of digital learning, tech-based edtech, the power of edtech as such. It is the next big thing in education, as we all recognize. So having mentioned to that and some sort of allocation to that in the budget is the right thing to do. Yeah.
Okay, great, Rohan. I think that's a very important point, especially for education. I think we need an outcomes budget also. You're spending this much, tell us what you've achieved.
Absolutely.
Correct. I think all of us agree that we need an outcomes budget. Anyway, I think we'll come back to some of the points. You raised some very good points. I'm going to ask you why not 6%?
Yes.
Obviously, you're looking at private investment making up for the deficit, but I disagree. Anyway, we'll have our discussion later. Sure. Swati, coming back to you again now. I'd like you to specifically address this issue of this Saksham Anganwadi program, formerly the ICDS program, where the allocation and very minimal allocation, like you said, only 0.3% has been given. It's about 20,260 crores this year. And do you think this will be enough to rewire Anganwadis, which have been shut for 2 years? And children's nutrition, I just calculated, we have about 164 million children in the 0 to 6 age group. It works out to about 2,200 rupees per child. I don't know what kind of nutrition we can offer children. Forget about early childhood education. And the second point while you're speaking is I also want you to address this issue of why nothing has been mentioned about this National Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Mission, which is especially now important since our children pre-primary children haven't been to school at all for 2 years. Unmute yourself, please. Thanks.
So sorry about that. I thought that is one line I won't hear now, but I keep forgetting every time. So the problem, Summiya, with our country is the status given to early childhood and early childhood education. We are a country that's very proudly populating itself. We love children and we keep on increasing the number of children, but there is no respect for children in this country because they're not the vote bank. Unlike the higher secondary, who are the vote bank of the government, these people are not the vote bank. But I blame the parents for not taking a stand when they are trying to vote for a party. I always say that vote for the party that puts in their manifesto that they're going to take care of your youngest children. That is a political party that really will care for this nation. And I had great hopes when the NEP came that at last they have now realized that the Anganwadi is also an education center. But I also feel guilty when I ask for money for education from Anganwadis because health and nutrition is so poor in our country. It is so poor. I mean, we have the maximum number of malnourished children that to take out something for education is a big task for the WCD department, you know. And that's why I was very happy when the NEP came and said the foundational years. So which means the MOE will also take charge of the 3 to 6 years, you know, age group. But I don't see that happening in the budget because if you see the announcement for a television channel, it's from grade 1 onwards. So again, you have forgotten your own NEP, which says 3 to 6 years is the foundational years of learning. Where is your literacy and numeracy going to happen if your schools are again going to be closed? Because I don't see this pandemic going away before 2025 or even later. You are going to have your click, brick happening. And the Anganwadis are suffering the most because the Anganwadi Sevikas are used for everything besides education. So it is very, very important to understand that till we don't have a concrete section called early childhood education, we are not going to be able to educate our youngest citizens. Right now, we think they are just 20% of the population, so chalta hai. But they are going to become 100% of your population when they grow up, and it's going to be too late. So if you study what other OECD countries or everybody else has done, is understand that the investment that you do in the early years is going to get you returns in the secondary and the higher secondary, which we are not understanding. We do all our programs are from grade 1 onwards, 6 years onwards, whereas the NEP clearly states 3 to 6 years. So it's very, very important to understand that education, till it doesn't get its identity, early childhood education has not got its identity. We say Anganwadis as if they are preschools. Anganwadis are not preschools. Anganwadis are centers where midday meals is given out, where inoculations are done and health is monitored. That's it. Anganwadi Sevikas are not trained for education. So when we are talking about Saksham Anganwadis and you're talking about audiovisual aids, etc., who is going to do the training of these Anganwadi Sevikas to help them understand actually what is their role when it comes to education? We have a very, very good NEP. We had a very good Nipun. Nipun talks about literacy and numeracy, and it's a fantastic document put together. But my question is, who is going to be using Nipun? I see private schools benefiting more from all these documents, but I don't see our children in our Anganwadis benefiting from this because there is no groundwork laid for investing in the education of the youngest. There are many states, Summiya, who have a child budget. Not many people know about it. You have Bihar, you have Karnataka last year made a child budget and gave 13% of its GDP, state GDP, to the child budget. But it was for below 18 years, which means again, it is spread over the whole age group. I feel the union government and the state government must keep at least 5% only for early childhood education from its education budget. Only then something will be done and our foundation will become stronger. Otherwise, your ASSA report is always lamenting that they can't read, they can't write, and they will lament because at the age when children's brain is being developed to learn, you're not giving them the foundational skills.
Correct. You're right. Absolutely right, Swati. I think a separate head called under school education and literacy called early childhood care and education has to be introduced. I think that's something, we'll write about and we'll take up now as in our analysis of this discussion.
Summiya, but the NEP tried to do that. The NEP tried to do that. It separated care and education. Care was under WCD and education was under MOE. So care was 0 to 3 years and education was 3 to 6 years. That clarity came about in the NEP, but it's not seen in the budget. So how are they going to implement the NEP is a doubt.
I suspect, Swati, that, instead of the union government taking the lead in NEP 2020 and setting a precedence for state governments, NEP 2020 is going to be left completely to state governments to muddle through. To muddle through. Yeah. Atul, coming quickly to you before I come to Divya. Atul, I wanted to, quickly come back to what you said about research. We all know less than 1% of India's GDP is allocated to research. And NEP, on the contrary, makes a very strong case for our universities to become not only multidisciplinary, but research universities. How is that going to happen unless, like you say, that you either increase allocation or allow the private sector, liberalize Indian higher education, liberalize the license permit quota thing, which is happening in Indian higher education, and you allow private capital. So what would you suggest should have been done in this budget?
I think before I answer this, again, I'm a numbers person, so I'm going to throw some numbers over here. I'm going to ask you a question. Do you know the total budget of, let's say, UPenn, University of Pennsylvania? Can you make a guess? What is the annual budget of UPenn? Make a guess.
Must be easily about like some 10,000 crores, 10 to 15,000 crores or something like that.
The annual budget of UPenn is $20 billion.
Ooh.
Okay. Now we're very proud of our IITs. Would you know what is the budget of IIT Kanpur or an IIT Chennai or IIT Delhi? Can you make a guess on that?
All IITs put together have been given some 8,000 crores, Atul. All the IITs put together.
For people who don't know the numbers, 20 billion. So, like I said, $1 billion is 7,500 crores. Multiplied by 20, that's 1,50,000 crores of one university. So, first of all, we need to realize that.
And just to set it in context, our union budget for the entire country for 300 and 250 million school-going children, plus you add another in higher education for 350 million children and youth is 104,000 crores.
So, well, we can always argue that, we are way more efficient in spending than the US. Having said that, I think it's very important to know that serious money has to get into R&D and innovation if you really expect to compete with the Stanfords and the UPenns or the Berkeleys of the world. So I think I just wanted to throw some numbers over here. So why is it happening? And I'll just take a minute over here to explain what the challenge is. While money in the United States or Europe goes into universities for research, in India, we actually took a very interesting approach of creating an entity called the CSIR and creating another entity called the DRDO, where money from the government actually went into government institutions, DRDO taking defense, because most of the money is actually for defense, if you think about it, even in the US, by the way. So I would have loved to see some convergence of that money coming into universities. Universities can actually have a way higher ROI in terms of capital which flows into for research and innovation. You've got so many hands and legs in terms of students and faculty, and they can sort of contribute. So that's one part of it. How do we get more government spending into the university system? And so money has to come from some of the government projects, DRDO, CSIR, and the others. The second thing is about private capital. Can we get more private CSR or other forms of capital into the university system for research and innovation? And that would only happen if there are some incentives and there are some hand-holding of that money coming into both private and public universities. So that can come through taxation breaks, it can come through, some other incentives and softs that the government can give. And I'm a little disappointed that it's not started to happen. So I think that's the most fundamental issue over here, that 50,000 crores that we're very proud of, that we've promised to invest in R&D in the university system over 5 years, is actually a very, very, very minuscule number when it comes to research and development. If we have to compete with the best in the world, and I'm talking about competing with the West. I'll also like to spend a minute to talk about probably where Rohan was going, why 6% is not needed. 6% is about GDP. It's not about whether the government is going to spend or private sector is going to spend. I'm of the belief that serious private money has to flow into universities in India. It's not just public universities or private universities. Together as a system, serious corporate money, serious GDP has to flow into the university system. And at the end of the day, yes, people give money for charity. You have to understand the emotion of private capital. It has to get returned. I'm on the board of several social impact funds. Social impact funds also have an ROI target. Well, it might be lower, but they have an ROI target. So expecting global capital to flow into India for higher ed without a for-profit motive, I think is really smoking dope. It's really a mirage. It ain't gonna happen. Some money will flow in. There'll be some stupid people like Atul Khosla and Summiya investing their lives and their money into the money. But if you really want the $1 trillion, you have to think about private capital.
Yes,
I think the third area which I would like to talk about is the area very tactically about patenting. So there are two types of patents. There are design patents and utility patents that you have. And many of you might not know that it takes 4 years for a utility patent to get granted once you file it. 4 years. So if I'm a student who's very excited about filing a utility patent, I'm pretty much now 2 or 3 years into my work before the patent is even granted. I would have actually loved to see how we can accelerate the patenting process. More money into patenting, more money into startup funds. Why can't we create a startup fund for students? And I'm not talking about, I was talking to a director of a large IIT and the guy said, oh, I created, a company which I gave some $1 million and it's getting a $600,000 revenue. I'm talking about how do we create unicorns out of IITs or Shoolinis or whatever. And while there are lots of unicorns coming out of IITs and other institutions, mind you, they are not seated in these institutions. Well, they were seated because a bunch of exciting guys came together in their hostel rooms and then they got that capital from VC and private equity companies. But how many of these incubators have created unicorns? Not even one unicorn coming out of it. So I think this whole culture of research and innovation has to change. And the last thought, Summiya, which is very important, and I face this on a daily basis. The government has to trust some private universities, if not all. There is so much mistrust. I can't explain. We don't get grants. When they come for inspection, as they call it, I gave a lecture the other day saying, I am not Gabbar Singh. I was a highly credible consultant. I was a leader in the industry when I decided to put my life into higher education. Trust me. Trust me that I can deliver something. Trust me that I'm actually putting value. When I come to Shoolini, you'll see wonders. I was doing some analysis the other day, Summiya.
Yeah.
For output, I'm a 89th ranked NRF university today. I have the highest citations per publication of any university in India as per QS. I have amongst the highest output, and I have the lowest cost out of all the 100 NRF universities. I have the lowest cost per student. We do innovation every day because.
No, Atul, I think you've raised some very important, valid points. We'll, try and tread that in our discussion as we go ahead. Thanks so much.
One second. Trust us.
Okay.
Right. There's a huge amount of mistrust between the government and the private sector. I think that bridge of trust has to come in. Over to you, Sonia.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. I mean, the psyche, the socialist psyche of Indian politicians, bureaucracy still exists, even though we're in the 21st century and we've had almost over 21 years of economic liberalization. Well, I don't know whether in education there's ever going to be liberalization, but Divya, I want to come to you and take off from where Atul said about these, this mistrust. As we know, over the past 2 years, in fact, the edtech sector has had a huge boom because of online education, and we've had almost 6 unicorns also in the edtech sector. What is your perspective, and what do you think the government should have done, especially for edtech sector? Do you think what mistrust he's talking about? Because as you know, there recently a long list of do's and don'ts was issued by the ministry for the edtech sector also. Do you think that a public-private partnership announcement should have been made in the union budget, where you're taken into confidence, and this whole inclusive online education and inclusive digital access, something could have been done in the union budget?
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at from a private player point of view, Summiya, I mean, when the pandemic hit, it's not like anybody reached out to the private players to really come out and help. The India was just thrown into a lurch of people figuring out on their own. Then you see private players coming with, conferencing platforms taking up in the first 6-8 months as a big thing. And there's no direction. If you remember the first 7-8 months, there was no direction, absolutely. Then, people were just left on their own, figure it, acha, let's increase the summer vacations by 3-4 months, and, we'll figure it by then, Till a time it came and it was almost made like a devil out of the edtech. That, children are committing suicide because they can't come on the class. You're not realizing that that's one of the space, and it's primarily the private players who actually stood up and ensured that if not all the government children, at least the private school children, which is like 3 lakh schools in this country, actually were learning because of some or the other private players stepping up in the space and providing a platform where teachers and students could connect. But the first messaging was very, very negative. If you see, it was all about, we will not do, I had states coming out and saying, we will not do online classes now. Okay. We will wait and everything. It's completely so what is your alternative? I feel that if the government would have come up and said that, okay, we'll back, like you said, some kind of a public partnership, etc. Please enable all states. Government school children can also get access via so many schools. Today, private schools in the last 1 year, if you look at, hardware players, they've sold the highest amount of hybrid classrooms, right? But is that infra being used by our children going to government schools? No. But you can come up with a policy and say infra on rotation basis can be built in. If you're doing one-on-one class, all the children in this country can get access, isn't it? And they could study on and off, etc. There could be so many handshakes that one can happen. May not be all the time on online. And, then online became like, oh my God. And, it's also the sin of the private schools also, that once it switched on, people just became cinema halls. It's like 6 hours of non-stop beaming. I'm telling people, just relax, give the kids some time off, give them something else to do. But it's like before any moderation happens, Soumya, an abuse happens. Okay, that's a very natural curve of when anything, it's very feverish, then it reaches an abuse level, then it kind of stabilizes in terms of a novelty phenomena, goes away, and people find real. For example, what we do, we're all about saying personalization while you're online, because we are trying to track the homework progress of a child, which is like 100 times and not 10 subjective assessments or whatever, etc. And then suggesting to a teacher, to a student, what could be. So I think it's a matter of saying right now, also today, it is very much in isolation. Has the government really said that, will the private players come together and set up a course for all the government schools in different states? Okay. And what can you give? And we can give this support, etc. So it's like two different worlds. And something you talked about, the bureaucracy, I mean, it's completely bureaucratic. You can go into an office today in the government and people will still ask me as a woman, like, okay, you're the CEO and founder, but like, who's like your husband, or who's the male counterpart really doing this? That's the truth. That's what you get asked. I mean, you're sitting in a government tender and you think, but like, who else is there? Like, what they would want to know. Yeah, so that is
misogyny everywhere. Anyway, thanks, Divya. Praveen, I want to come to you, and I want to talk to you to address a very important issue, I think, which has been missed out in the budget. At least I believe so. Our teachers, there's been no special focus on training our teachers. Our teachers now have been pushed into it's like they've been, pushed into a swimming pool without being taught how to swim. There's an education emergency. We know the kind of, learning loss that has happened. There's no mention about a word about, training, capacity building of our teachers. I mean, what's wrong there? I mean, why couldn't the union budget at least take a lead and say that we're setting up at least some kind of a national mission, at least some kind of precedent for states to take forward? Praveen?
Yes, Summiya, I think teacher training is, even before the pandemic, it's a fairly neglected area. Look at the state of our B.Ed colleges or the outcomes from the, education institutions as well. So when the pandemic started off, the government was only focused on how to get a device or, online content or, TV and things like that. The focus more on interactivity and how the children need to be engaged. As it is, children have very short attention span in a class. And now you're looking at asking them to look at devices and, ask them to, learn from there. It's very difficult. So some of our private schools have done a decent job in terms of trying to get, better engagement and better interactivity and things like that. And when you have somebody who's doing a better job than you, I think the government should have taken help of private schools as well in terms of training the teachers. You don't need to bring some external people or somebody from abroad and things like that. That was a very, very, sad situation. I understand that a large percentage of people don't have devices and, access to technology. But there's still a large percentage of people who have access. And those areas have been neglected very badly. And I really don't see currently what has happened is, I'll move from this topic to another one, which is, very important, is the spend of government on per child is massively high. In Telangana, we did an analysis. It was, I think, numbers a little bit off, but it's about 3,700 rupees or something in 2003-04. And in 2017, it went to 47,000 rupees. And that is a year-on-year increase of over 50% per child. It's not the budget, per child. That's the increase. And, there's a lot of commotion, there's a lot of activism, there's a lot of interest, so-called political interest to go against private schools who are increasing fees by even 10%. 10% seems to be a taboo and, why are you increasing and things like that. And on the other side, the government, that money is public money. and 70 to 75% of the expenditure is going to teacher salaries. And I think I really like what Atul and Rohan have said, is that the money that is going into education should not be going there, and continue to spend 60,000, 70,000 rupees per child. Probably the national average is about 45,000. You should, if we deregulate private schools, you will have high quality education at 20,000, 25,000 rupees a year. I think that needs to, serious rethink needs to be done. And I'm sure Rohan from CCS also will concur with
India's phenomenal private budget schools are already doing it, Praveen. They're offering education at price points of 8,000 per year, which is, phenomenal. I think in no country across the world this is being done. But instead of supporting them, the government is doing its best to shut them down. I think most of them have been shut. There's another point. For the last 2 years, they've been campaigning to be given MSME status so they can be eligible for bank loans, but the government refuses to do it. Rohan, you from of course, from a policy perspective, what everyone's consensus of opinion is there, at least if you can't spend money, let others spend money. Don't be a dog in the manger. But that's what seems to be the government seems to be doing. Your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, fully.
Budget a good opportunity to set at least a path with the NEP, especially having been a progressive document, to set a path forward for liberalization of Indian education.
No, I think thanks for this, and fully in agreement with where Praveen stopped, honestly speaking, and Atul touched upon that a little bit, Divya touched upon that a little bit. I come in here as a policy person as well as a practitioner. I mean, the project Bolo English, we run in over 1,000 budget private schools all over the country, and with some 300, it's a completely EdTech project, and we have an opportunity to work day in, day out with these teachers and schools, and we have seen what's been happening to them in the last 2 years' time. So what I say both as a policy sort of practitioner as well as an actual practitioner in education. So the first, I think, the principle that needs to be followed is fund students, not schools. The money should go where the students are going, not where the schools are. And when I say this is when I look at the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan getting over 50% of the school education budget, followed by Kendriya Vidyalayas and Navodaya Vidyalayas. These are the three main budget heads where the school education budget allocation is happening. But we are completely ignoring the fact that close to 50% of country's children are currently enrolled in private schools. Large number of those are in low-cost private schools, followed by the middle-income private schools, and then the elite private schools. So there is this big private school monopoly, lobby, etc., etc. That's not true. The elite private schools are just like 2% or even 1% of it. The large number of it are low-cost private schools, which are catering better quality education at a much lesser per child cost, as Atul was saying, as Praveen was saying. So there is no logic behind allocating more and more money to either Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan or to, let's say, Kendriya Vidyalayas, Navodaya Vidyalayas, whereas completely ignoring the other half of education, because where is your priority? Is it your schools or is it children? If children is your priority, the government money should follow the children. If they are walking with their feet and voting with their feet in favor of the low-cost private schools, then the money should also talk about how do we invent ways to fund students. And that could be in the form of, let's say, earlier we used to talk about school vouchers. Now let's say that that's a thing of the past. Then there is this entire concept of transferring money into students' accounts directly and let them choose the schools they want to go to and empower their choice. So empowering the parental choice, that's really, really important. And that's completely, when I say that the efficiency or accountability in spending is missing, this is where that whole point comes in, that you are stuck to running government schools. Now, the second point is related to the new education policy. The chapter 8 of it clearly talks in detail about separation of powers in education, that as a financier, as a regulator, and as a supplier, which is running the schools, making laws for the schools, and financing the education. Government can't play all three roles and also claim to be fair. They have to separate these roles. And if they were to separate the roles, there has to be financial allocation for that in the budget and mention of it. So that's where the efficiency point comes in. Outcomes-driven funding is something that's already covered. And I think we all understand the concept very well, that where the education outcomes are better is where the money should go. Now, coming to the 6% GDP allocation point, why do I say that that should not be a priority? for multiple reasons. One, of course, is that the 2015 Economic Survey of India and the 2021 both, if we see the household expenditure on education is already in the range of 2.3 to 3.2, 2.7, 2.9, 3.2%, something like that. Add the government 3% to it, we have already crossed 6% GDP. So why do we need to insist on only government should allocate that 6% of GDP? There is no magical sort of magic around that 6% number. We have to take into consideration the private expenditure that's happening. Where is that happening? And how can government empower that? So that's really the point around it. I think the point around teachers, 127 crore or something that is allocated for the teacher sort of training and capacity building, that is inadequate. I mean, that is not adequate to train either the teachers in the government system. A per innovation grant that a teacher in a typical even government school gets is 500 rupees per year. What will you innovate in 500 rupees per year allocation, right? So that's really the point. And second is, once again, I mean, what is this language that government children versus private children? There are, first of all, government doesn't produce any children. All children are private. You're tagging them as government. So, you know, there is this whole thing that if you go to a private school, then you're not government's responsibility. I don't understand it, that the teacher training, teacher capacity building has to happen across the board. Whichever teacher, whichever school she teaches in, she should be able to access this training. So that's really the point. And the last, not the least, is that even before EdTech settles down, they're already talking about regulation of it. And government is trying to get into the business of providing. In the name of access, we will run the television channel. But why? There are more than 4,300 apps and EdTech companies already there. There are many more coming. There is so much more innovation happening on the private side. Then the role of the government should be to facilitate that. All EdTech players in the country today will agree that there is a massive requirement for parental awareness, parental education. Retention is not happening. Children are not taking interest. Parents are not able to hand over that device to the children. So there is so much for the government to do on that front to make that access, facilitate that access, rather than running into either stifle down it with regulation even before the sector emerges. So nipping it at the bud, you know, it's really not the right sort of approach to it. And a lot of it is reflected in the budget. Just by the allocation, what you see is its complete lack of innovation, but also what is bigger concern for me is complete lack of efficiency and accountability. And that's really the concern. So yeah, that's the overall.
I think it's all three, according to me, Rohan. It's lack of imagination, lack of efficiency, and lack of accountability.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you want a new India, you need a new education system. So you got to reimagine it.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do in this next 5 minutes. I'm going to ask each one of you all to just give one point to reflect, which you think should have been in the budget. Probably, you know, we'll give our Union Finance Minister the next 12 months to ponder on each of your suggestions so she can include them in her next budget. Swati, one thing that you think should absolutely be in the budget?
Two things actually, according to me, because they are interrelated.
Sure.
When we talk about teacher education, for the early years, it's parent education also, which becomes important. And a lot of money is there in the Women and Child Development Ministry for them to take out a wee little bit for parent education, because parents in the, you know, when Rohan was talking about what is government school, in the early years, it is all about government school, because these people don't send their children except for the midday meal. They don't understand the importance of language development and how it's going to impact their child in the later years. So if we had some budget for, see, the whole idea of an Anganwadi is like a childcare center, which starts from a mother being pregnant who comes to an Anganwadi center. While getting her nutritional needs, she also gets a little gyan about how to take care of the child. And the child, when born, attends that same Anganwadi center. That should have been the model actually of an Anganwadi center, so that the first 6 years ko actually saksham bana sake hum. So parent education is something that's lacking in our Anganwadis and actually in our entire structure of education. When we talk about education, we only talk about educating the child or educating the teacher. we forget about educating the parent, because the parent is the key stakeholder, and the 2 years of pandemic have proved it. We needed the parent, even though education was happening by the teacher online. And number two, it is very, very important for our finance ministry to understand that there is a section called early childhood education. Please think about it. When you talk about education, you are forgetting that complete section in which 85% of your country's human resource brain is being developed. And it's very, very important to understand that if they keep on ignoring this, we are a young country, and we are going to lose out on developing the foundation for this young country, which is going to be bad. I mean, they should read James Heckman's theory immediately before they make the next financial budget.
I think that's very good advice. Atul, over to you now. Quickly, if you could give your one suggestion to the finance minister.
So I'm going to give two, if you allow me, Summiya. The first is where, we were talking about early education. So I'm going to make a hard statement. I've always believed that by the time most of the students hit higher ed, they've been through 15 years of educational abuse. Educationists, they are not innovative. Students have lost that energy. They're not thinking on the feet. The amount of knowledge is a bit of a question mark. And I think the investment in early years is very, very, very important. I think a disproportionate amount of money has to go into pre-primary and primary school teaching. Teacher education to make sure that students are thinking innovatively. We talk about research and innovation, but I mean, our students are honestly passengers. They're not drivers. They are not taught to think innovatively. And I'm even talking about the big schools. So how do we invest in preschool? And it should be way, way higher than what it is today. So that's one. I think for higher ed, I would have loved to see more institutions of eminence coming up in the country. I think there was a scheme that the government started where they gave 10 universities of eminence to the public sector, 10 to the private. I think this really needs to be expanded. I think have another 20. So I think that's one area where I would love the finance minister to really push.
Great. Thanks, Atul. Praveen, quickly to you now, if you could just give your advice.
I would say one word is deregulation. And, our country has great examples when an industry has been deregulated, the quality goes up, the price comes down. If you see emergency care, around the ambulance service, that's a great PPP model there. Then you have healthcare, high quality, probably in the higher private hospitals, it's costs have gone up, but so has the quality of service gone up. And all the, the old license Raj, when, we used to pay, don't get quality, there's no availability, and there is no, the price is very high. All that has come down, all industry sectors. So if we want to go, up there, compete with the world, China or, the US, if we don't tackle the issues of education head on, we will be nowhere. Thank you.
Well said, Praveen. Very well said. Divya?
I'll say, Summiya, when we know in this country that we'll never be able to have enough infra for every child to really go to a school and a preschool, that's just not possible. So right to education should be right to affordable data and device. And that's what they should focus at.
Great. So right to internet connectivity should be a right of every child.
And the device. I mean, they should provide it, because we'll not be able to build enough brick and mortar in our lifetime, even if we put it. There will still be millions of children who will not have a space to go to.
Right. Rohan, to you now.
What I said before, fund students, not students. Let the money go where the students are going. And more accountability, more efficiency. rather than, and the third one is allow innovation, not sort of conformity or compliance. Let the innovation, let the 1,000 flowers bloom. I mean, that's really the answer. So these are the three things. Yeah.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to my wonderful panelists. I think we've had a great discussion, first of its kind, I think, where we've actually discussed threadbare what's happening with the budget and education. I wish our finance minister can see this panel discussion just to hear the diversity, I think, from right from early childhood education to higher education and the edtech sector, K-12 and a policy perspective. I think we've had some wonderful insights and suggestions that have been given. I mean, early childhood education, don't ignore it. Praveen, what you said, deregulate, 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 keep that as your top 3 priorities. Divya, rope in the edtech sector. They're not your enemies. They can be wonderful partners. Don't regulate them before they grow. And Rohan, your suggestion of, accountability, spending effectively, fund children, not fund schools. I think those are all great ideas. And Atul, I think you were brilliant in some of the suggestions you gave about research and innovations, and also that why India needs to, utilize its private, enterprise. I think our great universities, which we've had over the last 10 years, are all, private universities, the one which have broken into the QS, including yours. As you said, OP Jindal, all these are great examples of, in what we call in education, enlightened capitalism. We have to encourage that in Indian education. And I still disagree, Rohan, with you. I think we have to hit that 6% of GDP target, precisely because we need money in early childhood education. We need money in our Anganwadis. Okay, don't spend in K-12 in school and higher education, let the private sector, but there we need money in our Anganwadis. That's where
realizing what's collected.
Percentage should go. Thank you so much.
I'm going to take a second of your Summiya, because you've hit the nail on the head. I was speaking to a student at a pre-primary school. It's a government entity. This small kid was Goldie, and I asked him, do you know a poem? And he said, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And I asked him, do you know why stars twinkle? And here was Goldie explaining refraction to me. I'm not joking. He was a small 2.5-year-old kid explaining roughly what is refraction. And I was telling myself, God, Goldie is great, but what is his future going to be? And I think we need to ensure that these Goldies become world beaters and they become the Einsteins and Newtons of the world. Intellect is not with, Shriram School and Delhi School or whatever, that we have. Intellect sits in the villages of India, and we have to make the Goldies of India successful.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think we all are in agreement. The top 3 priorities, according to me, of the government should be education, education, and education. That's how we're going to get anywhere and everywhere, including hitting that great mirage of a 5 trillion economy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Swati, Praveen, Divya, Atul, and Rohan. I think we've had a great discussion. We're going to try and put some of these points together and, get it across to the Union Finance Minister. So she at least has a template. She has the next 12 months to think about incorporating these suggestions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
very much.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you.